Good morning, everybody. We're back for another The Disaster Artist chapter summaries. We're going to do 14 and 15 today. I know what you're wondering. You're probably thinking, oh my god, Mr. Beery's going crazy. He's not wearing a shirt that's buttoned up all the way. That's what happens when you stay at home after 3 weeks. For 3 weeks now. Yeah, you start going a bit cuckoo. If I sound a bit weird, it's not because I have the coronavirus. It's because I have severe allergies. So I got my tissues. I'm ready to go, right? The show must go on, as a certain queen would say. We're going to start with chapter 14, which is called Highway of Hell. And in this chapter, Tommy is very, very depressed. We're going to see some of this. He comes close to suicide in a way, right? Well, according to Greg, anyways, he thinks, maybe he's going to kill himself. The first thing we're going to look at is Greg finally gets a job. He's been looking for a while now. So he finds a good job selling clothes at Armani, and it turns out that he's actually really good at it, so much so that he even gets scouted into a more profitable job, which means that like an undercover employee from a bigger brand came into the store and was looking for really good salesmen. So they offered him a really good job, and of course he took it. In the meantime, Tommy has started taking acting classes again with a guy called Brian Reese, and what's different about this acting class is it's out in the street, right on the corner of a street, and he just throws scenes at people and says, okay, do this. So it's very much in line with what Tommy is good at doing. Of course, he always tells Greg, oh yes, I'm very good at it, and I have so many friends. It's not only you who's able to make friends. And at one point, Greg is driving down that street where there are those classes, and if you want to follow along, this is on page 232. It says, a little while later, I went for a drive on Fontaine and noticed a large group of gesticulating Brian Reese actors standing on the corner, talking and laughing and hanging out. Then I saw Tommy. He was standing 15 feet away from everyone, arms crossed, head down, leaning against a brick wall. He looked about as glum and lonely as a human being could look. So again, exaggerating a story, right? Tommy saying, I have so many friends in this class, and I'm very popular. And then when actually you see him, he's alone in a corner. Comes back to what we were talking about last week about, should we trust Tommy when he talks about, growing up, his biography and everything? Well, another example here of him exaggerating facts and things like that. Another thing that's interesting in this chapter is that on page 233, Greg actually changes roles with Tommy from the beginning of the book, where Greg needed, a pep talk, needed motivation to want to keep being an actor, and Tommy was there for him. Now, in this case, on page 233, it's the opposite, right? Tommy is really out of shape, out of luck. Greg is there for him. He says, Tommy, I know you don't believe that. Come on, you have your script now. You're writing a lot. Just keep doing that. Keep pushing, and something will eventually happen. It was hard to give that advice because I didn't believe it myself. But then again, I realized, how was my disbelief in Tommy any different from my mother's disbelief in me? Who was I to know what was best for Tommy? So he is, again, trying to put himself in that perspective of, what do I know about success when it's not working for me, right? And of course, because his mother had not trusted him or had not, given him the support he needs, he figures out the same thing towards Tommy. So the next day, Greg wakes up and Tommy is gone. He says he's going to London, right? We'll come back to that later. But he just not mysteriously, he tells Greg that he's going to leave, but, kind of just vanishes during the night. At this point, Greg's, starting a new job, and he starts dating a girl called Amber, who works in the makeup department of the store where he works. So a lot of time goes by, and we're actually 9 months later now. Greg is dating Amber. He's getting less and less auditions, and he's kind of getting used to the routine. And 9 months, it's been 9 months now since he hasn't seen Tommy. And now Tommy, out of the blue, calls him up and he wants to see him. So immediately when Greg sees him again after 9 months, he notices how he describes him as being heavier now, physically and mentally, right? Physically, he's a lot more buff, right? He got beefed up, he worked out a lot, but also he looks, even gloomier and darker than usual. So Tommy is actually finished writing The Room, and he wants Greg to read it. What we find out in this chapter is that originally The Room was actually not a movie, but a play. On page 243, there's something quite funny here. Greg says, even though Tommy wanted The Room to be a play, his script opened with an external shot of an apartment building south of Market Street. So again, you say it's going to be a play. A play's on a stage, right? When you start reading the script, it says, there's going to be a camera shot of, the Market Street and apartment buildings. So he's writing a play, but thinking like if it's a movie. So again, shows he doesn't really know, he has no artistic vision, basically. So I kind of glanced over this, but while, in those 9 months where they don't see each other, he gets some weird calls from Tommy that shows that he's in a bad place, right? He's kind of saying that, this world doesn't want me anymore. Greg's very worried about him. He almost thinks it's like a suicide message. But on page 244, as Greg is sitting there reading the script to this movie, play, whatever it is, he realizes that a lot of what they have lived through is kind of in these pages, of course, in a weird, convoluted way. So on page 244, near the bottom there, it says, I had a sobering, sad, and powerful realization. Our friendship was the most human experience Tommy had had in the last few years, maybe ever. The happy news was that whatever Tommy had been running from, he had managed to turn and face it down in this script. Instead of killing himself, he wrote himself out of danger. He did this by making his character the one spotless human being amid chaos, lies, and infidelity. Johnny was perfect. He was a lost innocent, a pure victim, and Johnny's story was the perfect American drama, in Tommy's mind, anyway. So again, I've mentioned this in class before, but it is, if you look at the movie The Room, the only character who's perfect, right, who's the good guy, who helps everybody out, is Johnny, right? He's the only one who's there for everybody, who's a perfect guy. And on the last page of this chapter, he has a thought as he's reading through the script, right? Because he says, wow, I can't believe, the script is so good. He's basically lying to Tommy's face. I tried to imagine that. I saw the people patiently waiting for the play to begin. The actors would be Tommy and, oh Jesus, probably me, doing it out of pity. So he clearly feels, again, that he owes things to Tommy, and he's always getting sucked into things that maybe he doesn't necessarily want to do. So chapter 15 is God Forgive Me, which is what he says, if you remember in the movie, what he says just before shooting himself in the head. So of course, this is the last scene that is shot in the movie, and it's the one we're going to talk about now. So one thing that's pretty funny in this chapter is we find out that Tommy has no idea how to, kill himself, basically, is at the bottom of the first page here. It says, take after take, Tommy was so focused on capturing Johnny's emotional upheaval that he was floundering out of frame, wincing, crying out, flailing his arms, all this after he had pulled the trigger. So that means that he would go like this, shoot himself, and then be like, oh no, ow, aye, and then he would, get up and run around. Of course, he's supposed to be dead. He just shot himself in the head. So, again, people must be going like, what is going on? This guy is so weird. Other scenes that are filmed in this chapter are basically all the sex scenes, right? They keep that for the end. Now, what we find out is that usually in a movie production, when there are sex scenes, they film those on a closed set, which means that you only have the people that are super necessary to be there, right? So like the cameraman, maybe the lighting guy, and the director. That would probably be it. There wouldn't be any script supervisor or things like that, right? Because it can be embarrassing to some, and it's an intimate scene. Tommy, no way. He brings everybody. He wants every single person to be there, to see him basically with his butt out. What we find out in this chapter is he actually likes to have his butt out a lot, and he likes to show people his butt a lot. He actually thinks that showing his butt is what's going to make this movie great. It didn't. So one of the weird things about, one of many weird things in this movie is just before Tommy kills himself, right? He takes one of Lisa's dresses and he kind of like, ooh, and he, almost like if he's making love to the dress before killing himself. Now, Greg had seen this in the script, but he was like, man, he's it's just kind of a thought. He's never going to do that for real. But every time they would film the scene, he would keep, kind of humping that dress. Now, everybody on the set are going, what is he doing to that dress? What is going on? They're trying to figure out, does he think this is normal, or is he trying to do something provocative? Nobody knows what Tommy is doing. We also find out that they hired an acting coach to help, finish the movie, and it's a lady called Diane. Now, she comes into this movie, fresh. She doesn't know anything about it, and she's just there to help with the big emotional ending of the movie, which is, Mark, Lisa and Denny coming up to Johnny's body and being like, oh no, and they're supposed to be sad, right? At this point, all the actors are sick of it, so it's hard for them to get that emotion of being sad to see Johnny dead, right? Even Mark, Greg, is like, I phoned it in, he says, which means phoning it in means you're not really trying. So this Diane lady comes in to help finish the movie, and it says, before we got ready to film the scene, she took us all aside and started telling us what she felt was at stake in this scene. So, she's like, see, your best friend is dead, and, you're trying to put yourself in that perspective that it's your fault, and she's actually giving good tips. And Greg says, whoa, stop, come here. So he brings her over to the dailies, which is basically, what they film every day, so you can see how the movie is coming along. So he just says to the guy, hey, show 2 seconds of footage from this movie. 2:54. So they start the scene. Diane's expression started in a place of benign expectation, corkscrewed into abject shock, and mainlined into something like existential confusion. Then she started to laugh. So I said, that's where we're at. So basically he's saying, like, listen, you don't have to take this seriously. This is c'est n'importe quoi, right? And the final thing of importance in this chapter is that Amber breaks up with Greg. So their relationship wasn't going too well. They mentioned being almost more friends than lovers. And so they decide to break up. Well, it's mostly Amber who decides to break up with Greg. When Greg tells this to Tommy, Tommy's all of a sudden like, oh yes, very good, we're going to use this emotion for the movie, and he starts filming him with a camera while Greg is there, crying because he just got dumped. Just to give an example of how out there Tommy is, on page 257, he says, look at your eyes, my God, somebody is so sad tonight. How much did you love her on scale from 1 to 10? Can you smile a little bit, or is this all end of the world? You are not smiling at all, Greg. What is the problem? He's asking him, what is the problem, when he's just been dumped? Tommy, I said, covering his lens, what do you think is the problem? So again, social cues, he's not getting it really at all. So that's it for chapters 14 and 15. There'll be 3 questions beneath. Try to answer those. During the Easter break, I'll do one last video for 16 and 17, and we'll be finished with the disaster artist. Take care. Enjoy your Easter holiday. Use this time to stay home and do all the things that you have been doing for the past 3 weeks. Enjoy.